Jessie has and how she feels about Jesus in her heart, and that no matter what's going on in her little life, nothing's going to steal her joy. And what a wonderful way for us to live as well. Having that joy that no one can snatch away, that no one can steal, because of the joy and the love of Jesus in our life. Welcome to everyone as we conclude this excellent series that we're doing on outflowing of God's love, outward focused living in a self-focused world. You know, I remember a few years ago now, many years ago, when I was studying my theological degree, and I came across another student. His name was Arthur. Arthur was larger than life. He was a big character, and he was completely blind. He went blind when he was 19 years old. I remember saying to Arthur, I said, mate, how do you cope with it, your blindness? And he said, Craig, he said, I got joy. He said, I was once bitter when I lost my sight, but I got joy because I know what it's like to see. I know what trees look like. I know what sky looks like. I remember myself, even though I was a much younger person. But I knew I was always going to lose my sight. I was told that from birth. But I never wanted to become bitter. I wanted to have the joy and the love of Jesus Christ in my heart. And I thought, what a wonderful way to live your life. And I remember quite distinctively when I very first met Arthur, I was told I had to go, I was asked if I could go and pick him up and drive him to a module that we were, and it was about a 2-hour drive. And I thought, sure, I'm more than happy to do this. And I thought, well, I've never really spent a lot of time with someone who was blind, who has absolutely no sight. I wonder what this guy is going to be like. And as I drove up to his place on the north side of Brisbane, there he was, standing there with his wife and his backpack. And I walked up the steps and I introduced myself, and he smiled and he said, hi, my name is Arthur. Arthur then just grabbed the rail and he walked down the stairs. And I noticed that his backpack was sitting there and he'd forgotten it. So I said to him, I said, Arthur. And he turned to me and he said, yes. And I said, would you like me to grab your bag? He said, you filthy, rotten person, keep away from my wife. And I thought at that point in time, I'm going to enjoy this next 2 hours with Arthur. He had such a wonderful sense of humour, and he used to play lots of practical jokes on me. When we were on a spiritual retreat, we were in this room, there was about 8 of us, and we were in many rooms, but there was 8 of us in this one room, and I had to be on the top bunk, Arthur was on the bottom bunk. And I got up in the middle of the night to get my bottle of water. As I'm hanging over the top of the bunk, Arthur comes out and he grabs my leg and he screams, and I screamed, and we woke everyone up. And he goes, it's good to see you're awake and alive. I said, thanks a lot, Arthur. Then after getting back to sleep, and we're going to get up for early morning devotions at 6 o'clock, unbeknownst to me, Arthur had a very strange alarm clock. It could play sounds, noises, objects. And here I am, in the deepest of sleep, and I hear this chugga, 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 chugga. And then this big steam train, woo, woo, and just made all this noise and racket. We wondered what was going on. And Arthur's just laying there, chuckling to himself. He was an amazing guy. He could walk into a room and he would put his cane aside and he would step out the whole place. And then when we'd go to morning tea or something like that, he would just walk straight in, turn around and sit down without bumping into anything. And I said, Arthur, how do you do that? And he goes, it's one of my other senses. I have a mind map and I just know where objects are. And then he had this braille computer. And I'd never seen one of these before, but he used to sit there with headphones on and he had a braille keyboard and a little laptop and he would just type away. And every time he hit the full stop, so at the end of a sentence, it would repeat back to him. that whole sentence. And it sounded like Darth Vader. And because he used to play so many practical jokes on me, I thought I'd get him. And I realised that that computer could do all different types of voices. So I did. I set them on we had 52 different voices. I put 52 voices in there. And Arthur comes in and he sits down and he's typing away, and then you can just hear him giggling and laughing. And Randy Edwards said, "Arthur, are you okay?" And Arthur said, "Yes, I am. But something very funny has happened to me, and I will make sure I get him back later on." What a way to live your life, with the joy and the hope of Jesus Christ. You know, you've heard me talk about donuts over the last couple of weeks. I bought it yesterday. So this donut represents our life. The hole in the donut is what we try to stuff into that life. All the things like money, cars, clothes, education, holidays, anything that you try to stuff into your life to give you satisfaction. And guess what? The hole will always remain. The only thing that can fill that hole to give you complete and utter satisfaction, regardless of what's going on in your life, is Jesus Christ. I want you to think for a moment, have you ever sat there or laid there or stood there and said, "Here I am, Lord, send me"? Regardless of what's going on, here I am, Lord, send me. I remember praying this in 2018. Now, I sent to the Middle East twice. I'd already been once previously. And a young man had an accident. And I got told to go down to the hospital. He'd stepped on an IED and he was all messed up. And as I walked into where he was, into the hospital facility, he grabbed my arm and he said, "Thank expletive that you are here. You are my only hope." And I thought to myself instantaneously, gee, no pressure if I'm your only hope. However, I've been praying, "Here I am, Lord, send me." And as he lay there, and he was there for quite some time in that facility, I just treated him as if I was in his situation. And before he got taken to Germany, before he came back home, because it's where we send our medical facility people when they're injured, he thanked me for treating him with dignity and respect. And I spent some time and I had a little prayer with him. "Here I am, Lord, send me." I want you to think about a multi-tiered fountain. At the top of that fountain is your relationship with Jesus. And when your relationship with Jesus is full, it starts to overflow. It starts to outflow over to the next tier, which is your family, fills up again, to your friends, fills up again, to your community. That final outflow pool is our community. That's where we are sent, to the farthest ends of the world. And the goal of our message today, it's actually quite simple. We are to embrace the outflow love of God into all aspects of our life. Now, I understand that some people may be intimidated in proclaiming salvation to the four winds and the seven seas. And if you feel this way, that's okay. You're not alone. But let's look at and unpack what the Bible has to say about our very own God-given responsibilities to this. And that is, we are sent. We are sent. We play a key role in reaching the ends of the earth. It says in John chapter 17, verse 18, Jesus prays for his Father about his followers, saying, "Just as you sent me into the world, I'm sending them into the world." Jesus wasn't just sending the apostles, but he was sending every single person who has accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Saviour into the world. And when we look at this scripture that was read out earlier in our service by Sid, we see here that Paul proclaims that every single person belongs to Jesus Christ as a new creation, a new person. Their old lives have passed away and a new life has begun. And we celebrated a baptism 2 weeks ago when Mick was baptised, and we're celebrating again this morning when Jesse was baptised. And I'm pretty sure we celebrated, and your church celebrated, and your family celebrated when you were baptised, and your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids are being baptised. Sins are forgiven. We are now made as ambassadors, speaking his message of reconciliation to the world. And as you can see, being an ambassador of Christ flows naturally out of being a new creation. There's no getting away from it. There's no getting around it. Being sent is a vital part of being a fully devoted follower of Christ. Now, not all people get sent to the farthest fields of Africa or some other faraway country. But I strongly believe in supporting these types of missionaries. We as a church support missionaries in Bolivia and Egypt and Thailand and Niger. And these people are serving Jesus in those far-off countries. But we also support a combined Vassafern youth ministries that's combined with all our youth from the churches here in the greater Boonah area. And Tanya and Andrew and the youth leaders are doing an absolutely fantastic, amazing job at this. And we should never cease praying for them as they work with the primary and high school-aged youth here in our community. Missionaries are called to be salt and light, to be constantly involved in their communities through hobbies and sports, through discipleship, through workplaces, through our homes, and being deeply rooted in having a balanced lifestyle. We are to be both salt and light of the world. That's what the Bible says, to be salt and light. And just as there are people who do this effectively overseas in those other countries, we are to continue to live each day as ambassadors of Jesus Christ right here in the greater Boonah area. If you are a Christian, you are an ambassador of Jesus Christ, and you are to be an ambassador with your hobbies, your schools, your homes, your retirement homes, through independent living, through your neighbourhood, through businesses, because you are valued and respected in everything that you do. This is because we deeply care about you. It's authentic, it's passionate, it's enduring, it's effective. And that is why this church was planted here to be missionaries in the greater Boonah area. We are to be those ambassadors of Christ in the greater Boonah area. This is because the people who live here are homeless, there's retirees, there's young families, there's youth, there's singles. And we are to care for all generations, across all generations. It's tempting to tell God to send someone else to do this. But in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8, it says, "Whom shall I send? And who will go before us? And I said, Here I am, send me." And we see that Moses' reaction in Exodus chapter 3, verses 9 to 14, and again in Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 to 4, and chapter 5, verse 1. We see Isaiah jumps at the chance to go wherever God wanted him to go and to send him. Moses, on the other hand, begged and he pleaded, and he even said, "Hey, I think you got the wrong person here. You got the wrong person for the job." He even begged God, saying, "Lord, please send someone else." And I wonder, what's our natural response to God? Are we like Isaiah? Are we like Moses? Who are we? Who are we at the Boonah Church of Christ? In Exodus chapter 3, verse 11, but Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to the Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" In essence, Moses was telling God that although he's almighty, he's all-powerful, he's all-knowing, he is everywhere, and he created the heavens and the earth, and he created me, surely now you got it dead wrong. And yet there's many Christians today that are just like Moses. They often hear God's small, still voice saying, "Hey, I want to send you. I want you to speak on my behalf." And yet their first reaction is, just wait a minute. I can't do that. I don't have these sort of qualifications. Well, let me tell you about qualifications and people feeling inadequate. When I was going through theological college back in 1998, there was a guy there that I became friends with. And you wouldn't believe it. He couldn't read or write. He was sitting in church. And he felt God's small voice saying, "You're going to go to theological college. You're going to study a theological degree." And he said, "Well, Lord, I'm illiterate. I can't read or write." He said, "Trust me." So over the next few years, he self-taught himself to read and write to get to the standard to get through theological college and study a theological degree. And when it would come upon graduation and we were looking at our academic transcripts, he said, "Guess what?" I said, "What?" He said, "You know, I got nearly all distinctions." He was a man, couldn't read or write. God said, "Come follow me." He said, "Here I am, Lord. Send me." And at graduation, I said, where are you going? What are you going to do? Because he went through the whole process of not knowing why he was there. And he said, "Craig, I've been called to Melbourne to work on the streets with the prostitutes and the drug addicts and the homeless." He was a man, felt so underqualified. God called him. And he said, "Here I am. Send me." And you know, Moses didn't realise the fact that he was only a Hebrew slave. But he was a secret noble in the Pharaoh's household. That meant there wasn't anyone else in history that was more qualified to do what God was going to tell him to do. He didn't realise that all of his life experiences up to that point in time had prepared him for what was ahead of him and what God was calling and seeking him to do. Just as Moses, like most Christians today, don't realise because they haven't grasped that God knows who you are. He knows your limitations, he knows your faults, he knows your weaknesses, he knows your failures, but guess what? He knows your heart, he knows your gifts, he knows your talents, he knows your abilities. God created you and he's calling you. Are you today in your heart saying, "Here I am, Lord, send me"? God knows firsthand your struggles, your hurts, your heartaches. It's your personal life experiences that have prepared you to relate more deeply and to bring people closer to the light and love of Jesus Christ. God never sets anyone up for failure. When God sends you, you're never on your own. God promised Moses, "I will be with you." Even with everything that was going on for him, Moses would still need God's holy power and presence to succeed. And of course he did succeed. Because Moses had submitted to God's will and he was obedient to God. And Moses went where God had sent him and God went with him. And guess what? Multitudes of people were released from their bondages. And I wonder if we submit to God, each and every one of us submit to God, and if we're obedient to God, and if we went where God called us to go and do what God had called us to go and do, how many more multitudes of people would be released from their bondages and bring the light and hope of Jesus Christ in their dark and falling and struggling world? Remember, God not only sends us, but God is with us. And there's people probably sitting here today and saying, well, what if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to me? And my answer is, so what? You're God's messenger. That is it. To sow the seeds of God's love through faith. And like Moses thought and voiced this to God, God answered him saying, what's that in your hand? Then God took this simple shepherd's staff, and there was a miracle that occurred. He miraculously transformed it into a snake. Moses had a staff in his hand because he was a shepherd. If Moses was an accountant, he would have used a calculator. So whatever it is in your hand, from your history, from your knowledge, from your skills, from your opportunities, from your profession, from your gifts, talents and abilities, God will use it to establish credibility for the message to be heard through you. God will use whatever's in your hands for his purpose. And you know what? We can accept people for who they are right where they're at, regardless of where they come from. We continue to be real and authentic, to be open and transparent, to offer hope to people who live in hopelessness, to help people in crisis. If you're not serving in your local church, why not? Put your hand up and say, here I am, Lord, send me. I will serve you. We can always continue to pray and to trust God for the outcomes. And it simply begins by noticing others and taking them into your heart. It's a relief to know that being authentic doesn't put pressure on you to have the right words to say in the right way. Moses too was worried that he wasn't good enough with words and to go where God was sending him. He said, I'm not very good with words. You know, there's a book called Now That You're a Christian by Bruce Bickle and Stan Jantz. They give 3 word-centered jobs that God is not sending us to do. First is, we're not sent out to be God's public relationship managers. God doesn't need us to build up any hype about him or say things that people just want to hear. We're just got to share the truth. Sharing Jesus is often letting people get to see us and know us, and through that, they get to know him. Second, we're not Christ's sales managers either. We don't get paid commissions or wages to sell Jesus to people. People don't like sales pitches, presentations, or clever illustrations. It just simply needs to be heard. And they can see what Jesus has done in your life by continuing, allowing them to get to know you. And third, we're not God's marketing consultants either. God doesn't need us to position Jesus into people's minds or use any sort of tactics to get them to understand the message. God sends us into the world to be ourselves. We don't need to be some sort of spin doctor for Jesus. The more authentic, open and transparent that we are with people, the more they want to know why we follow Jesus. In Exodus chapter 4, in verse 15, it tells us that God told Moses that he'd put words into both his mouth and into Aaron's, and he'd be with them, instructing them what to do. And Jesus promises the same thing. In Luke chapter 21, verse 15, he says, for I will give you the words and wisdom, and none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. So the bottom line is, we don't need to worry about words to keep us from the mission in reaching people with the good news of Jesus Christ. And like in the movie Spider-Man, our DNA has now been altered once we accepted Jesus Christ. Becoming a new creation in Christ changes our spiritual genetics. So we're no longer content to wait for the world to come and see what we have to offer. And like in the Spider-Man movies, Christ followers can't stand by living self-focused lives when we are called to be outward-focused. We must go beyond ourselves to give freely away the power and the presence and the hope of God to people who are in desperate need, people who are struggling and needing a helping hand. And just as it would have been selfish for Peter, who was Spider-Man, to sit by and not use his powers for good, it's selfish for us to sit back and not use our God-given joy and gifts and talents and abilities to help people discover the eternal peace and the eternal life by the life and hope of Jesus Christ. And like Spider-Man, we won't make a difference sitting safely in our webs all day, waiting for the world to come to us. We've got to get out into the world, be real. That's where the action is. Getting amongst the people, amongst the community, being the light and hope and joy of Jesus Christ. That's what Jesus meant when he said we're both salt and light of the world. We are called to be both salt and light. And just as light changes things when it comes in contact with, so when you walk in a dark room and you flick on the light switch, it expels the darkness. God uses us to change the people in our world. And salt changes things it encounters. Jesus tells us as followers we are to be the salt of the earth. Our relationship with him should naturally overflow and outflow into those around us, to our family, our friends, our neighbours, and our community. Salt melts ice. Jesus can melt the coldest of hearts. As Christ's followers, we have the ability to melt the cold indifference of the secular world by simply allowing the love of God to outflow from us. Salt enhances food's flavour. As Christians, people have traded the dry, tasteless existence of a life, that self-focusedness, those who have lost their joy. Salt preserves food. Jesus' followers are to go where he sends us. He will bring the joy and the compassion from heaven to people through you. Salt makes people thirsty. As those around you witness the love of God outflowing from within you, they will thirst for what you have. And guess what? Salt doesn't change anything if it remains in the container. If salt never leaves the shaker, moisture will eventually harden that salt into this rock-solid mass. No matter how hard it's shaken, no salt will ever come out. You can shake it, you can bang it, but it won't come out. The salt grains become so crusty and so set in place that the salt shaker can no longer do what it was in fact designed to do. Christians too can become crusty and hardened to God's desires for enhanced flavour to create the thirst in the world. Jesus warns us that it's even possible for us to lose our saltiness and become absolutely nothing. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, it says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." What a warning we have. That's what happens when Christians become self-focused instead of outward-focused. That's what happens when Christians become so self-focused instead of shaking things up in their relationship with God. That's what happens when Christians become so self-focused and don't shake things up in their world. Light draws the source of all eyes to it. The bad news is we live in a world where spiritual darkness breeds fear, hurt, hatred, lust, selfishness, and self-focusedness. But the good news is God gives us the light to walk by. But as we walk in it, we can't become the light that leads us towards others towards God's healing and hope if we never walk in God's light. Every Christian is meant to bring light into someone's darkness every day. Even when the darkness in people's lives is so apparent, it's the little things that we do and don't do that we're helping people around us to come closer to Jesus. The light that is kindled inside us, as so small as that little flicker can be in someone's heart, it still has amazing power to attract and transform others. Even the smallest light can lead someone home to Jesus. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 15, it says, "In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." I love what Calvin Miller writes. He says this: "Loving the world at large can only be done face to face. The world is not so distant. For salt and light bring that catalytic reaction they're created to produce. They have to make contact, just as the seed has to make contact with the soil to produce new life. We are to sow the seeds of love through faith." In Matthew chapter 13, verses 3 to 8, it says this: "And he told them many things in the parables, saying, A farmer went out to sow his seed. He was scattering the seed along, and some of it fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up and the plants were scorched and withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on the good soil and produced a crop, 100, 60 or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. We are to sow the seeds of love through faith. Successful planters sow lots of seeds. And usually before new life takes root, we need to sow those small seeds of God's love and kindness to those around us and impact their hearts. The sower doesn't worry about wasting the seeds. He isn't concerned if they fall on a path where the birds can get them. He doesn't get concerned if they fall on the rocky places where they don't have a hard time putting down roots, or in places where they might get choked, or even in good soil. The point is, you need to sow the seeds of love right where you are and continue sowing those seeds. And God delights in turning our scarcity into this outflowing of abundance. In Matthew chapter 14, verses 15 to 21, it says this: As evening approached, the disciples came and said to him and said this: This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and sell some food. And Jesus replied, They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. We here only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish, they answered. Bring them here to me, he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke those loaves. He then gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. And they all ate and they were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. And the number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The disciples only had 5 loaves and 2 small fish to feed a multitude of hungry listeners. They didn't have enough to feed themselves, let alone the thousands of people. But when they gave that little bit that they had to Jesus and Jesus blessed it, it was more than enough for everyone. It was an outflow, it was an overflowing of an abundance. So, friends, 5 weeks down, overflow come to an end. We've been talking about this for 5 weeks now. We need to continue to put it into practice each and every day. If we just keep this as a mental exercise or a spiritual exercise, then guess what? We've failed. We have failed God. We're not saying, "Here I am, Lord, send me." We will have failed with the outflow of God's love that is in us. We will have failed being the light and the salt of the world. It's time today, in your heart, regardless of what's going on, and say, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Outflow has to go. It has to outflow through our family, our friends, and our community. That's why this church was planted here all those years ago, to be a New Testament church. It's not up to one person, it's not up to a small group. It's up to each and every individual working together in the body of Christ, being obedient to Jesus, submitting to his will, so he gets all the glory. It's time to say, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Outflow has to go across all generations. Elderly, midlife. Am I midlife? I'd like to think so, maybe not. The younger people, kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, across all generations, through you, through the outflow and the light of Jesus Christ. Starts now, starts today. "Here I am, Lord, send me." It's time to get up. It's time to go. It's time to outflow. We are living in a self-focused world. We are called to live outward-focused for the glory of Jesus Christ. "Here I am, Lord, send me." I want you to continue this week reading the Gospel of John for 30 minutes every day. I want you to continue spending time in your quiet time with daily prayer and worship every day for 30 minutes. And your spiritual reflections will hit your inbox tomorrow. If you'd like a copy of those spiritual reflections, feel free to send me, and I'm more than happy to put them in your inbox. There's 5 parts. Really, to break it all down, it's quite so simple. Don't judge. Listen actively. Share the good news of Jesus Christ. And to be that living hope that does not steal your joy in the greater area here in Boonah. This is our mission field. This is why the church was planted here. And when the church looks after one another, that is the New Testament church. Doing it together with one another under the lordship of Jesus Christ. It's time to get up, get out, and outflow. Please stay after the service for fellowship. We have a special morning tea.